Welcome everyone, and I'm so happy to meet you again in my Audit and Vision channel. And today I would like to discuss the matter which is not primarily related to the audit profession and the audit task, but we are checking and testing the results of that. So I've been on, let's say, every chair of the chain. I've been working in the first line of defense. I've been working in the second line of defense where the controls are designing. I've been working for the SOX, non-SOX, hard SOX, light SOX, scope, all the kind of stuff. Of course, I've been working in the third line. And on top of that, I was working in the fourth line because I've been an external auditor, financial reporting auditor. But today I would like to discuss exactly the second line, and the topic is about how to create the controls that really matters, that also bringing the added value, that really providing us with all the insights that we need to have, and those controls that also auditable. What I consider is a unique experience, in my opinion, and of course, I am not trying to push myself forward, but actually that I've been on all the sides of the table. So that's why I am designing the control already with a knowledge how it's going to be audited at the end. Then the auditors are happy, we're getting the clean reports, or if it's not clean, but at least it will be easier, faster, and cheaper to the company to execute the external audit, for example. Or if it is the internal audit, that also could be the matter of the budget. So let's get started. Today, I would stick again with the 5 main reasons, but then we can enhance them. So let's start with the first, and this is the purpose. So no matter how you design the control, it starts with the risk. We can argue a lot about this. What is first? It's an egg and chicken thing, but for me, it's very clear. It starts with risk. We don't need to have a control just for the sake of control if there is no risk associated with that. And if we're talking about the financial statement risk, then of course we always need to look into what is the assertions are associated with that financial statement line or with the process, etc. By the way, if you want to learn more about the financial statement assertions from my huge SOX and JSOX experience, just let me know in the comments, and then I can explore it even more. The risk needs to basically being a purpose of this control, or sometimes people are calling it a control objective. But control objective, it should be tied up to the risk. And then we can decide, is it, let's say, detective or preventive, for instance? What risk do you prevent or detect with that? And then, of course, we need to understand the risk. So, for instance, we need to prevent the contract, the signing beyond some thresholds or limits. So the risk would be the risk of misconduct of our delegation of authority or the budget control, so you name it. But I hope you understand the point and understand the purpose. So we start with the purpose. The second point, which I would like to talk a bit more, it's who, what, when, and how. So I think you heard it a lot in many different process mining or other change management perspective or responsibility RACI chart. It's more or less the same working for internal control design. So who? We need to be very clear who is executing that. Even though there are a lot of debates about that, so we don't need to put the exact name in the control description, because then we will spend more time on the administrating and maintaining the control, that we need to change the name from Alex to Anna and then other way around. But we need to be very clear. What is the department? What is the specialist? So let me give you the example. Yes. So for instance, we're talking about the same risk about designing the contract. And let's assume this is the accountability as per the process. It's a supply chain or procurement. So then we are saying that process owner is the head of the procurement department. And then the procurement specialist would be the who, because that person is executing of the control. I'm also kind of a little bit reflecting on the RACI chart. And if you don't know what it stands for, it's a responsible, accountant, consultant, and informed. I don't want to mess it now, but here the what is important to understand. And for the auditors, it's also important then to have an interview with or walk through with the appropriate control performer. Then they can understand who is the business owner, who is the control performer. And this is the very key, and this is where we start. Then, of course, we have what. The what could be described in a different manner, but I always like to use this simple formula. What is should be tied up or completely mapped out to the risk or to the objective where we start the purpose. So if I'm saying that the purpose is prevent the signing contracts beyond the described limits or established limits, then the what, it will be basically to do something to prevent it. And then we need to understand how to design it in a better way. Of course, I'm skipping the most important part of interview of understanding the walkthrough of the process because we are on the designing phase. But let's assume that we had this design interview walkthrough. We know that the process is automated, semi-automated. So the limits are assigned and then followed, but then someone needs to check on a quarterly, whatever frequency, to understand whether those limits are still valid, whether they are in line with the approved policy, whether there's still people who are recruited and still in the company, they didn't left. We don't have someone who already left the company sitting there as an approver. So that's the, let's say, the detective part that we will be executing. And then we understand this is not the preventing. So the preventing part would be the IT part, right? So the system is maintaining it. So they would not allow me to approve something if it is beyond my limit, because that's a IT control, right? A system related control. But the part that someone is double checking, so that's actually the what. So then we can describe the what, that the system is, in this case, if we're taking only the part of the preventing part, then we would describe the what as the system is set up in a way that it following this delegation of authority. And now, of course, my language is pretty plain, but you understand the meaning, because here I am not trying to talk in an academical audit, internal control, assurance, super duper language, but then you can comprehend and understand. So that's the what. Then we have when. So when I already mentioned, so it's not like exact time. Of course, if the control is very much important within the period, months end close, a period end close, like annual year end close, quarter, etc., then we need to be very explicit in the calendar. Let's say we would have the controls calendar, and then it will be clear that work day 4, I do this and that. So then it will be very clear. Sometimes it's very important because the nature of this control is actually to prevent that the bookings would be okay, that they will be booked correctly prior we close our financial statement and we will close our period. So that makes sense. But if it's not that kind of control, then we are defining the frequency. So it's a monthly. In general, it's a good practice to define the range of the dates, that we are not doing it on a 1st and then 25 of the working day, or let's say we are always executing it in the work day number 8, and then we all of a sudden started executing in work day 25. So for the auditors, it will be also the question mark, okay, why you don't do this, why you not follow your discipline, because as anything in this world, the control should be having their own governance and discipline. That's very much important. So here you have some kind of flexibility, but still that's important to put a range. Then, of course, the how. And actually, the how should be prior. Let's say it should be very much connected to the what. So the how, it's mainly the control steps, which would help the auditor to do their testing steps. So you are not trying to replicate this, because what is the tricky point? If you design the steps in the control and some of the steps not accurately or not fully followed up, then the auditors could say, oh, you do have the design issue. And then they also can even consider it an operational deficiency issue. So it's very much important to write need to know basis. It's like less is more, of course, but still being quite explicit. So you're not putting the control something like on a monthly basis, supply chain management specialist, withdrawing the report, reviewing a couple of things, and then, I don't know, the limits, and then submitting his manager, supply chain manager, for the review and the approval. Then they retain this documentation, blah, blah, blah. So here it's very high level narrative. So we need to understand what exactly we're doing there, and how I would also disclose, and then point number 5, because the reporting and the how we're extracting the data, that's very much important as well. So how needs to be really limited to the point that it's auditable. So I'm always questioning my how. Is it auditable? Can I reperform it myself? Can I understand the step, every step, and can I gather for each step the documentation I need? So if we're saying I extract the step number 1, I extract the report, then I am processing it as a step number 2. So then you need to justify with the evidence that you did this step. So the first you extracted, this is it. The second I processed, and the third someone reviewed. So of course, if you have a GRC system or some kind of system that handle the reconciliation or any kind of things, then of course there you will have a timestamp, but that's what we need. So basically always ask yourself how it is connected to what. Is it disconnected or not? If we're thinking what did that someone is reviewing, or it's IT control, as I already mentioned, and then in the how you're just all of a sudden writing down some manual stuff, so then it will be absolutely the mesh. Yeah, no one can understand, and then we will have a design deficiency and operating deficiency. So then the number 3, it's accountability. I already mentioned that it's who, but now I would like to describe the RACI, like again, responsible, accountable, consultant, informed. The RACI chart is very much important, and I'm pretty sure that you know that, but just to refresh, so responsible, it would be the person who is actually the control owner, the control performer, who is performing the control, who is a doer. In a nutshell, it's a doer. Accountable, the person is the business process owner. If you're not operating with those terms like business process owner, control performer, there are different names like control operator, but you understand the meaning. So it is the responsible, it's R. The accountable part, it will be the business owner. Let's say it could be the management review control or reviewer who is taking the accountability for the process. Who will take a blame? Let me be very basic. Who will take a blame for if something goes wrong? So the chief accountant, the financial manager, will take let's say, the hit or responsibility for not accrued goodwill or something like that, but not the person like a fixed asset accountant. Of course, that person should be executing all the checks, all the narratives that we have, but that person would not be accountable. That's a difference between the responsible, I'm doer, and accountable, I am owning the process. Then consultant, I think here is very easy. There is no clear responsibility. I'm not doer, I'm not accountable for the process, but I need to be consulted. So for the control, you don't have a consultant unless it's necessary, but be careful if you are putting the consultant in your control narrative, in your what and how, then you need to demonstrate of the evidence how you're gonna demonstrate that. So if you are writing that in case of discrepancies, we're asking consultancy of the marketing department, then really be careful of what you want to put. Again, less is more and need to know basis. And then informed, this is the important part for the control. So who needs to be informed? It's not that the person is taking the decision making. So the review will be coming to the accountable party. But informed, it's also important that, for instance, we're sending out the report or following up, because one point is when the performer performed and the reviewer reviewed, and then let's assume we have a huge discrepancies. And for instance, the system doesn't work as it intended, and it doesn't catching the limits that I referred in the beginning, then we need to inform the IT director, and then they need to open up the incident, etc., etc. And of course, we cannot combine all this IT controls, process controls, financial items controls, but it also should be important that what is the follow-up, because then the control makes sense, then the cycle is complete, and then it brings the added value, not just it's landing out on someone's desk and okay, we execute it and system doesn't work. Next time again, it doesn't work. But what we do in order to make it better. So we think from the perspective of the auditors. Of course, for me, it's easy. As I said, I was sitting in the both sides, but you can also learn from that. Then the fourth, it's very important, is called IUC, or information used by company, or it's also called IP, it's information produced by entity. So there are different abbreviations about that. But all in all, what does it mean? It actually means that how we do retrieve the data which we need to process. So if it is the absolutely, let's say, automated control, which is happening within our database in our backend, then we will demonstrate it via our IT controls, change management, information security, incident management, etc., etc., access management. So we're not taking into account this part. So let's assume that all these IT controls are working perfectly and as intended. We have segregation of duties and so forth. But how we can ensure that actually the report that we gathered from the system was not manipulated to accommodate the control? So let me give you an example. So I took all the logs with the approvals or all the limits from the system, SAP, let's imagine, and then I did some manipulation. I added the correct thresholds, removed the wrong people who already left, and then I documented, oh, everything is good. But that's basically the control is not working as intended. So even though we'd be having a perfect evidence, but the control does not mitigate the risk. And that's the aim of this control. It should be mitigating the risk. That's the most important part. And basically, then we don't need to have the control, which is just for the sake of the control. That's why we need to do this kind of evidence, not but evidence, or the screenshotting, let's say, the timestamp that, yes, this is the number of rows that I gathered. I can demonstrate it to the auditor. Of course, the auditor cannot reperform and take it the same day, going back in time and trying to upload that information, but we have a timestamp that this is the snapshot of what we gathered. And this is the Excel, which is, let's say, here 10 pages and 2,000 rows, here 10 pages, 2,000 rows, start with this, end with that. So that basically we can compare, and we can also demonstrate to the external auditors, internal auditors, whoever wants to check it, double check compliance, that there is the data integrity. So basically we can demonstrate the completeness of the data integrity. Once again, I'm repeating myself. Never mind. So that's the processing, the further processing. And then if we're again using some Power BI dashboard, so then it should be always related to the data obtaining and the data gathering from the system, where we cannot demonstrate it, the completeness. In other words, so the data integrity it is and the data completeness is demonstrated via the information used by company, IUC, or IPE information populated by entity. That should be a part of your evidence, which is leading us to the step number 5, which is the evidence. I think already across all these 5 steps I described that the evidence is the key. As I like to say, it's not documented, it's not done. In our assurance world, that should be the rule. It's not documented, it's not done. And if we do have the perfect evidences, which I already explained, so they need to be really in an appropriate manner organized, again, thinking about our auditors or any other body who is going to check, thinking about our reviewer, if it is the review control, how he's going to ensure that all the steps have been done as per the design, whether it's documented, so whether we're not missing any steps or any points. So it should be really one-to-one aligning with our steps, with our how and what. And of course, also containing the IUC information. That's very much important. Of course, you can cover more here in this case. There are more elements, but I wanted to share with you the most important and the critical point that I consider myself as a very essential ones. And within my long career in the assurance field and the many different design of the controls that I have been doing, was the most important one. So others, sometimes they are must have, sometimes they're nice to have, but this is must have, in my opinion, in my professional opinion. I'm really grateful for you that you just listen up until this very end, and I talk to you soon. Bye.